Hi there folks, and welcome to July and my movies by month for this summer month. Now, there's been quite a lot and this is going to be a pretty long video, so let's kick things off with the things that I saw at home, either streaming or on Blu-ray. Sometimes, even the most random choices can be great, which was definitely the case with Jiro Dreams of Sushi. This is kind of an unassuming documentary about Jiro Ono, who at the time was an 85-year-old master sushi chef in Shokunin. And this documentary was all about his life, his vision, and the crazy but calm laser focus and obsession that he's got with making sushi. And it's kind of hard to argue that this is anything short of fascinating. I mean, genuinely 5 out of 5 from me, just to see the lengths that true Epicurean attention to detail can bring when creating food. It's also amazing that 11 years later, Jiro was still making sushi at the age of 96. I mean, honestly, good job that man. But aside from that, this is just an absolutely classic documentary. It tells you all kinds of little aspects about the making of sushi, the way that the business is run at this kind of high end, and the effect that this has on Jiro and his family. But yeah, well worth your time and your attention. But of course, for every great movie, you've got to have a bad one. And next up on the Sunday film night rotation was A Belfast Story. Now, this low-rent effort was kind of interesting in the way it looked, because it was about cops chasing down vigilantes murdering ex-IRA members in Belfast, funnily enough. And initially this was quite promising, both as a mystery unfolding, but also with Star Trek's very own Chief Miles Edwards O'Brien, Cole Meany, as a cop put on the case, both as an investigator and also as a potential scapegoat. And unfortunately, this is kind of boring, long-winded, and ultimately kind of befuddling film that's empty and runs out of steam before the end and ideas. Also, it has an ending that's completely baffling because the final narration drops out of nowhere with a whole bunch of plot beats that don't really make a lot of sense, and are kind of troubling considering the rest of the story of the movie. Anyway, 2 out of 5 because at least it was a coherent story, but really no more than that, and it's definitely not one that I would waste your time trying to seek out. And things didn't get an awful lot better with The Devil's Rock. Now this is a New Zealand-made super low-budget horror movie set on an island near Guernsey the night before D-Day, where a pair of Kiwi commandos are sent in to knock out an anti-ship gun and basically escape to allow the ships to pass in the night and take out the Germans in Normandy. Of course, that never goes smoothly and they find themselves in the midst of an occult Nazi experiment that's summoned a demoness. And there's a good history of these sorts of horror films. I mean, we only have to look at like Peter Jackson's first movie and stuff like Shadow in the Clouds, where you can see that New Zealand actually churns out some interesting low budget horror. But here, it's not only low budget, it's badly made, terrible attempts at accents, there's a lack of sense, the script's thin, the acting's kind of hammy, the wigs are terrible, and as a film that's clearly the love child of a special effects dude who got a shot at directing, you would expect that it would be a little bit better. I mean, although the corpses and the gore effects are all top notch and the demon makeup's pretty good, beyond that it's not a good film. Also, if you've ever seen one Nazi zombies on an island movie, and there's more than a couple out there, you've basically already seen this, only it's not zombies, it's a demon, but effectively it's the same idea. So 2 out of 5, not great, not terrible, but certainly not entertaining. And finally up for this month's film of Fridays on Sundays was Becky. Now, Becky's an interesting one because it's one of that particular kind of horror movie, the home invasion film. Now, you might have seen examples of this before. Basically, the gist of it is people in a house and bad guys come. And bad guys do nasty things and they have to kill some of them. You've seen this before, like films like Us, films like Funny Games, but essentially in this case, it's all about a young family and a teenager called Becky who's upset because her mum died of cancer and dad's decided he wants to remarry his girlfriend and move into the old family home, and she promptly blows a gasket and gets incredibly stroppy and teenage. Just so happens at the same time, a whole bunch of Nazis have escaped from prison and are looking for something hidden in that house. So they come to the house and cause all sorts of mischief, which leaves Becky ready to rain down terror upon them all, using all the angst that only a teenage girl can suffice with all the random things that happen to be lying about in a family holiday home. And that's basically it. I mean, some nice performances by Kevin James, who usually you expect him in comedy stuff, but actually he's, pretty terrifying here at a few moments, and that great big huge guy who's on that bit in Sherlock Holmes. But beyond that, this is actually, it's not a great movie. I mean, it's not bad, but essentially the script is kind of daft. Too many of the bad guys have like a weird Achilles heel that just happens to fall exactly at the right moment, that happens to allow Becky to kill them nastily, and then also at the same time, for a bunch of neo-Nazi psychopaths, they just completely ignore the opportunity to torture like a couple of characters that they completely would, and there's no reason for them not to, just because I presume that would have taken a little bit more effort writing the story. But the actress who plays Becky herself is really good in the film. As I said, some of the performances are great, cinematography is fantastic, and the gore and special effects in it are really top notch. So yeah, 3 out of 5. Worth watching, and there is apparently a sequel in the works, so maybe that'll improve on it as it is left wide open for a franchise full of interesting kills. And another step into the beyond of badness that this month's Sunday night film nights was spiralling into was The Highwayman, a film about an old-time carriageway robber with tricorn hat, wig and other such outfits, and it was all about Dick Turpin, who's been reimagined in the style of a semi-hapless Jack Sparrow type, but without the endearing charm and without the budget to actually do any of the hijinks. And through comedy hapless errors, he ends up kidnapping the daughter of a broke earl who's also the key to a fortune of coal somehow, and there's a bad guy after them, obviously. And this is cheap, like shot on the super cheap with lazy dull camera angles. Most of the film is long boring scenes of flat naff dialogue, so yeah, 2 out of 5. It's really not worth the effort. Basically, you're better off watching Plunkett and McLean instead. Remember that? Plunkett and McLean, yeah? Yeah, the one with the two guys from Trainspotting. Yeah, nobody seems to remember that one. But yeah, it's a much better Highwayman style movie, and probably would only cost you about £1 out of your local DVD basement bin. Now, a film franchise that's been long recommended to me has actually been the Paddington movies. These classic adaptations of like the old English novels are really kind of fun, and I decided not just to watch the first film about the bear from Darkest Peru, but also Paddington 2. Hey, that rhymes. Now, the films are kind of muchness in terms of quality, so I'll review them both simultaneously, and they're both solidly fun, sweet films, very much in a whole family-pleasing mould. I mean, yes, it's kids' films, so there's pratfalls and daft moments to keep the wee ones entertained, but also grown-ups might find some of the clever humour and fun watching, especially the adults ham it up with absolute glee. I mean, really, especially the performances of the villains, they're just top-notch. One thing that did surprise me is that Paddington 1, it's basically exactly the same plot as the movie Beethoven, the Disney film about the big dog. If you've ever seen that, then yeah, it's the same basic story, with just a few changes. Paddington 2, though, is a far more interesting beast that leans into Tales of the Riverbank a little bit, with Paddington doing a bit of a Toad of Toad Hall, stuck almost in a Wes Anderson movie kind of feel. And they're both fun films, and definitely high-end 3 out of 5s from me, but maybe not more than that, because while I did laugh a lot at them, at the end of the day, a lot of it was still kids filmy and a bit daft, and it suffered a little in that way. But I'm not really the target audience for this, but I did enjoy it. So yeah, if you're thinking of something to settle down with for the kids that's harmless, entertaining fun, you could go a lot worse than Paddington. And following the theme of animated animals in movies, I also saw Zootropolis, which apparently is called Zootopia elsewhere in the world outside the UK for reasons. But anyway, this is a quirky animated tale about a world full of animals where they've all evolved to live together in harmony in a futuristic society, but in that society there are kind of rules, like rabbits aren't cops, until one day our main character decides that she wants to be a cop, and on her first day she ends up embroiled in a big huge case, which is also a mystery and a conspiracy, and this is actually kind of an interesting film that's a basic sort of your neo-noir kind of detective story, just updated a little bit. And there's some good laughs in it, there's some very clever witty dialogue and some very choice moments, but the metaphors are a little bit too all over the place, and the world building has holes that you could park the Death Star in, but I'd still enjoyed it. I mean, 4 out of 5, you should give it a shot, it's actually a lot of fun. Now the next film I've got is a strange one, and I apologise in advance because the footage I've got is a little low quality, because this film's never actually been released on HD as far as I know, but I watched Everything is Illuminated, directed by Liev Schreiber, who you might remember played Sabretooth in one of the X-Men movies and is also in that TV show Ray Donovan. And this film's based on a book by Jonathan Safran Foer, the guy who wrote Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which they also adapted into a film a few years ago, but I still haven't seen. And Everything is Illuminated is this fictionalised, semi-autobiographical account of him, played by Frodo of Lord of the Rings, who travels up to Ukraine to research his family's flee from the Holocaust back in World War II. And he gets helped by Alex, who's played by the singer from Gogol Bordello, which is a fantastic band.
But I'm a wanderlust king. I stay on the run.
And also by Alex's granddad, who says he's blind but can still drive a car, and it's bonkers. It's a very weird road movie. It's all about culture clash, family, history, and what we keep from the past as mementos. And I'll give it 4 out of 5 because I really enjoyed the emotional journey of this film. It's funny as well as touching. I mean, it loses a little bit because a few moments it feels like it drags or goes round in circles, and some of the culture clash stuff, like him being vegetarian and everyone being confused, it feels like that's a trope that's been tried to death and is done by just about every American who's vegetarian who's ever travelled in Europe seems to have a boring story about that. But yeah, beyond that, definitely worth seeking out. If it ever comes on TV, make the time for it. And speaking of clashes with foreign cultures, I also saw The Farewell, which is the story of Billy, played by Awkwafina. You know, her who was on Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings and Swan Song. Here she's playing a down-on-the-luck granddaughter of Nai Nai, who's like a sweet Beijing grandma who has cancer, but nobody in the family wants to tell her, so the whole family just descend on her visiting, secretly wanting to say goodbye to her under the pretense of it being a cousin's wedding. Now, Billy's struggling with her grief, with the lies, with the schisms of coming back to China after living a lifetime almost entirely in New York, and this is quite a sweet and heartfelt film that really captures that family feeling, you know, everyone eating, arguing with relations, or just supporting and loving each other. So 4 out of 5, because it's genuinely a lovely film and a really good experience. I mean, it does lose a little from feeling a little flat and, you know, having a few dawdling moments, and to be honest, not really being anything particularly groundbreaking in terms of the philosophizing or the revelations people come to. They all feel quite obvious. But no, it's certainly an entertaining film, and another film that I thought was definitely worth your time to see. Now, anyone who watched the channel for any length of time will know that I like video games, so I finally got round to watching Tomb Raider, the recent adaptation, and that's the one with Alicia Vikander, who you might remember was the robot lassie from Ex Machina. Now, this is actually the second movie adaptation version of Lara Croft, long after the Angelina Jolie ones that were kind of ropey but actually kind of camp fun as well, based on the long-running series of old and quite dated at this point Tomb Raider games that introduced the character at first. This time what we've got is a film based on the far more recent Tomb Raider trilogy, which reimagines Lara as kind of more of a trust fund teenager rather than like a mid-20s rich woman. She still loves archaeology and languages, and she ends up getting embroiled with this evil corporation Trinity, and the film roughly follows the idea of the games, with Lara being whisked out of her London grungy student life to explore an island full of bad guys while looking for a magical MacGuffin. And this is awful. It's terrible, like borderline unwatchably awful, and worse, forgettably boring, with all the visually exciting stuff in the trailer. And what it also ends up being is a naff version of the same crap stuff that Uncharted did a few months ago. Not quite as badly as this, and this has even less charm, and it has an even worse script. So there's really nothing to recommend here. I mean, despite the presence of a few quality actors and some half-decent budget, I don't know where they spent it on or who okayed the script, because it's downright terrible. 1 out of 5. So yeah, just get the games instead. They're a damn sight better, and they'll probably cost you about £5 for the entire trilogy at this point, and you'll get hours and hours of fun out of that. Here you'll have 90 minutes of pain. Moving out of the house and back into the multiplexes, July actually was a cascade of blockbuster movies, as befits the summertime, and I made a point of trying to see as many of them as I could this month, starting out with Jurassic Park Domination. Now yeah, this is the 6th and hopefully the final installment of this Dino Rampage franchise, and after the last 2 films, which were an increasing trudge into terribleness, I kind of thought that it couldn't possibly get worse than the last one. But this did. It was an overstuffed, underthought pile of cheesy garbage that spends the first half of the movie trying to be sort of a Jason Bourne meets James Bond movie with dinosaurs in it, and then it moves to not Jurassic Park, where basically it's just exactly the same tired nonsense about people running about the place and dinosaurs eating them, that literally has scenes just stolen straight from the first movie, and so many callbacks to the first movie that it just gets boring. And also, you just never feel that anyone's in peril, because it becomes obvious pretty early on that they're not going to kill off any of the good guy characters. They're only going to kill off background extras or like bad dudes. It's not a good film. Like, it's a 2 out of 5 at best. And yeah, I wasn't prepared for how bad this would be, even though the last film was so bad. Yeah, this is just worse. This is the rise of Skywalker of Jurassic Park films, and apparently it did really well, which is a shame, because it deserves to be seen by no one. Don't waste the time, the effort, or the money on this one, honestly. And because the Disney Marvel content train cannot be stopped any more than other franchises, I also saw Thor Love and Thunder, the 4th Thor movie in what feels like now the 250th film in this comic book franchise universe. And this is another film by Taika Waititi, the guy who made the last Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok, which was actually pretty good, and the World War II comedy film Jojo Rabbit, which was excellent. Now, here we pick up with post-Endgame Thor. If you remember, he went off with the Guardians of the Galaxy at the end of that movie, and yeah, after an opening boring battle, he ditches them and goes off on a quest to stop Gandhi's evil twin, Gore the God Butcher, from wiping out the Asgardians. But wait, there's also another Thor on the prowl, and it turns out to be his ex-girlfriend Jane, who magically now has the hammer and the abilities of Thor. And as I said, Ragnarok was kind of fun, but this feels like a horrible mess of trying too hard, completely missing the mark, and trying to squeeze far too much into one single movie. As a result, it's messy, it's tired, and it's It's not funny, which is the worst thing a comedy can be. At least I certainly thought so. So yeah, 2 out of 5 for me, because I'm just tired of giving these films the benefit of the doubt anymore when they're rubbish. And with the amount of money, time and resources they had to make this good, they just didn't. And I hate to say it, Taika Waititi, the shtick is not lasting anymore. I mean, honestly, it feels like we've seen every trick he's got, and now either he's not trying, or he's just hating the studio system so much that he just couldn't be bothered. And actually, going by some of the interviews and things where he's been openly mocking this film and the CGI in it, it could be that he just wasn't happy with this product, and we shouldn't be either. But a step back towards good films was Elvis. And this is the biopic of Elvis Presley, made by Baz Luhrmann. You know, he of the Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes Romeo and Juliet movie, and the Moulin Rouge musical film that's probably the thing he's best known for. But this is a more serious film, following the career of Elvis Presley, told from the point of view of his stage manager, Tom Parker, played by creepy fat Tom Hanks with a Dutch accent. And it's a pretty good time. I mean, especially for somebody like me who knew practically nothing about Elvis before going in, other than a few songs and what I saw in Bubba Hotep. Seriously, you should watch Bubba Hotep if you haven't. It's hysterically funny. It's old man Elvis in a retirement home fighting with undead, soul-stealing Egyptian mummy spirits. It's just silly and it's fun. But anyway, Elvis was really, really good, and Austin Butler, who absolutely kills it, both acting-wise and also singing exactly like him, because he does all his singing in the movie. And what's more, he's actually also been cast as the bad guy in Dune Part 2, so looking forward to that immensely. And it is a little scrappy at the beginning and right at the end, and there's a couple of bits where it's a little hard to follow like the logic of the story because it seems to jump through things that kind of feel like they ought to be important. But anyway, it's also a little bit long, but it's absolutely a 4 out of 5, worth checking out, and well better than most of the other cinema releases this month. Bear in mind I said most. Okay, well, a lot of things haven't been great. One film I saw that actually blew me away was Top Gun Maverick. Now, yeah, I know, I was never a huge fan of the original Top Gun, but other people in my family were, so I ended up growing up with it on the TV a lot. So while I can totally say that it wasn't a favourite of mine, I knew it well enough to know the original's a nicely shot film with some great footage of planes flying around, while still being very lacking in terms of story, plot or character, and certainly in terms of pacing or any common sense. Now, no one was more amazed than I was when Top Gun Maverick turned out to be an absolute gem of a movie. I mean, it's not only better than the first film, it's far more coherent, it's relatable, it's not only that, it actually has a comprehensible plot that makes a lot of sense, and is beautifully filmed, with the actors actually really piloting planes at points. Now, this time round, the story's about aging Maverick getting pulled back in to train a bunch of newbie Top Gun pilots who've been asked to do an impossible mission, which is basically the Death Star trench run from Star Wars, bombing a baddie base in a mountain crater, but then escaping in a life and death gauntlet of missiles and enemy planes. But worse, one of the pilots he has to train is the son of Goose, who was his old co-pilot who died in the first film during a flight accident. So there's a lot of ground to be made up there, and as well as that, there's a budding romance with an old flame, and lots of machismo and lots of plane porn. And basically, this is kind of as popcorn as films get, but it's unashamedly a summer film. It's a proper, note perfect, never forgets the audience wants to be a flight combat for dummies, but still showing everyone being really competent at the highest levels doing these jobs. So yeah, go and see it. It's proper summer entertainment. You know, even step up for an IMAX showing if you can. I mean, I never expected to like this movie, certainly not as much as I did, but there you go. 5 out of 5. This is thus far my recommendation for the summer. Phew! Well, that was one hell of a lot of films that I saw. That was more films I've seen in July than I have in the last few months put together. And it's been great, although not particularly when it comes to editing these videos together. That's been a bit of a chore. But in any case, as we trip along to the far end of summer towards the first hints of autumn and the first touch of winter's chill, I feel pretty content because I've seen an awful lot of movies and enjoyed an awful lot of them. I mean, yeah, sure, there's been some low entries here and there, but the good ones have more than made up for it. So until next month, these have been my grumpy opinions.